City of Stevens Point, Police and Fire Commission meeting, recorded Tuesday, August 6, 2019.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Police and Fire Commission meeting for Tuesday, August the 6th. And we'll have Leanne, please call the roll.
Carlson?
Yes.
Kirschling?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes, here.
And Westcott?
Here, and Commissioner Ostrowski is excused from this meeting, so we certainly will hope the best. I just have a couple of quick items. We do have Chris Holman, our county executive, here today. So to speed things along, just a couple of quick announcements for the commission. Our next meeting is September the 3rd. That meeting will be held on that Tuesday, the first Tuesday right after Labor Day. It's hard to believe, back to school time, but this is our last meeting before all of the students return to the classroom, K through 12, and the university. So I'm not quite sure where another summer went. A little bit later, we'll have a hearty discussion on the capital budgets for police and fire. And we're looking forward to an update on the operational budgets for the year 2020, including new officers and firefighters, and we'll look forward to an update on that. All right, with that said, I would like to allow our Chief Finn to formally introduce the Portage County Executive, Chris Holman. It is my understanding that the executive emailed or called, I'm not sure which one, the fire chief after the conclusion of the EMS contract, which we had a very thorough discussion on earlier. And Chief, I'll let you introduce Chris.
Thank you, sir. If I could make one recommendation, that item number 7 on the agenda, update on the dilution of the Communication Center Board. If we could talk about that during Executive Holman's presentation or right after that, we can move it up because it's all kind of tied in together.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we hear from our county exec on what he wished to address the commission on or talk about? And when he's concluded, I will then move right away to item 7 while the executive is still with us. Okay.
I'd like to thank Executive Holman for taking this opportunity to speak to the Police and Fire Commission, or the Police and Fire Department's governing body. I think it's the first time since I've been here that a county exec actually took interest in what the Police and Fire Department do in the city. Last month, or a special meeting, this body approved an EMS contract. I think Executive Holman was instrumental in doing that. And some of the stuff that you're going to see in our that was approved for capital last year, like our new paging system, Executive Holman has moved that along and we're getting answers. So I truly believe that we're in a new day and age that with this county executive and this body that we can probably start getting along. Commissioner Carlson, you were in the negotiations. I believe that we've turned the corner of ghosts of the past, for lack of a better term, and I want to thank Executive Holman for his efforts in that.
Very good. Chris, if you'd like to go right there, sir. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate being granted a few minutes just to come and talk to the commission. It's true, I just reached out to Chief Finn afterward to say, I think it's important to come and say thank you to the commission for its efforts on the negotiating team and to the city's team in general. It certainly took us a while to get through the negotiations. We had some twists and turns here and there, but I do think that the overall process that we went through was a positive at the end of the day. I know there's a long history to the departments and the fire department especially, also to the relationship between the city and the county. And so I think, and you've alluded to that as well, Chief, in the sense that I think that this is an opportunity to start rebuilding the trust that I think was lost, and kind of, in my opinion, would kind of needlessly complicate what I see as more straightforward conversations. I do think that moving forward we'll have plenty more opportunities to work together, whether that's discussing ambulance rates like we've done recently with our billing provider, or training opportunities for the providers in the county, whether that be the paramedics, law enforcement, the EMRs as well. Anybody in the kind of overall system, I think we'll see a lot more collaborative work there. Same with the capital improvement plan for the system in general. It's very important to have the input from the providers at the table when we're talking about the equipment that these individuals are using on a daily basis. I do think that, well, I should mention as well that last night, the Finance Committee for the county approved the contract, so they're on the track to going to the county board. I understand the council will be entertaining the same sort of approval here soon, so it'll be good to kind of have a final closure on that. One thing to expand upon a little bit is one of the things that came out of the overall conversation is the county's taking a slightly different look at the EMS coordinator position. I think that it had kind of evolved over time and changed quite a bit, and put the individual who had been in that position in some awkward situations perhaps, but also didn't necessarily provide the sort of clarity or focus that I think that position needs in order to be very successful in what it does. That's to be determined in terms of what the final picture looks like, but we did also meet with the service providers to say, what's important to you from this position, and what do you need to see from that position, so that when we finally get through some of the other decisions that we're working through now to kind of stabilize the overall system, and we hire that individual, that not only is that individual working in the right place, but they have the right job description. They come in with a clean slate, so to speak, and can move forward and do the job that needs to get done. You may or may not know that I think a couple months ago spent a 24-hour shift with the fire department. That was a really exciting experience for me. I did learn a great deal in that shift, and I bring it up here today because it was very serendipitous in many ways, in the fact that some of the issues that had been kind of actively being discussed during the negotiation process, like we went through them during the shift that I was on. And so granted, I wasn't having the hands-on experience per se, but you're seeing the event unfold. You're getting an understanding of how it plays out as it occurs. And so then being able to take that experience back to the negotiations and say, and kind of highlight how this works and how it doesn't work. Granted, it was a limited kind of experience, but still much more than I had previous to that. That was very instrumental to my own understanding, and I think to some of the pieces that were confused, let's say. There's 2 other shifts I still have to go back and work with, so I'm looking forward to those. But yeah, aside from that, I think there's been whispers also of the EMS Oversight Committee, its role, and whether or not it should persist in its current form or change some sort of form. It's not in this current contract like it was in the last one, but I think the key component to that conversation is that the most important part of the EMS Oversight Committee's role is maintaining the channels of communication between the providers, between the county, everybody, the tech team, and so on and so forth. So I think even if there was a doing away with, let's say, of that particular committee, the focus would then, in my mind, immediately shift to how do you then create those channels in a way that better suits the sorts of things that everybody wants to see happen, whether it's communication or tech teamwork, things like that. Not to cast aspersions against the committee as it has been. It's just that I think that the feedback I have received from a large number of people who have been on the committee or not, or participated in some form or fashion, is that over time it's kind of lost a bit of its edge or its focus, let's say. So I think that there's no saying for sure that it will go away. That's not my call. But I will say that what will be important to me is making sure that the reasons it was there in the first place are maintained in some other form. I don't have a whole lot of other things to say. I know we've been working on the G2 Phoenix system. That's kind of being put on hold as I understand it. So we'll work with that as this new RMS CAD system goes through its paces at the county and other levels. And similarly, and I was just talking with Chief Gems about it today, about how to, get county IT pushing the CAD data that needs to get to the department through ImageTrend. And we've got a pretty clear path on how to do that. I will say that the path in general for some of this is convoluted just by the nature of the software itself, the lack of desire of the company, TriTech, to really support it without, let's say, fiscal penalties. And just the big question of what will the next system be and how will it interface, and those are a lot of unknowns that will come into focus as that conversation moves along. Certainly happy to answer any questions you might have, And I look forward to continuing to work with you, with the providers. I haven't met with the city police department yet, but I certainly plan on doing that as well, Chief, and hopefully get some free time from here or there to do some ride-alongs with you as well.
Those shifts aren't 24 hours, so.
That's okay.
No. All right.
Whatever the shift is my kind of mentality. Like, taking a sort of a limited tour is all fine and dandy, but it was the same thing I did with the dispatch center is, what's your shift? I'll do that. Again, it doesn't make me an expert on anything, but it gives you a more, I don't know, authentic feel of what one day in the life of that person or that position might be.
Are there any questions for Executive Holman on the contract? I know Commissioner Carlson, you were a member of the negotiating team. Any thoughts?
I just want to make a comment. I think it was probably one of the most interesting and at times weird negotiations, but what really came through loud and clear for me is Executive Holman was working for everybody in Portage County, not just the county, not just the city, but all of under 70,000 residents. That came through loud and clear for me.
Any other thoughts, Commissioners? I certainly would echo and most welcome this very refreshing approach. It is reminiscent, at least to me, of 20-some years ago when we were working to begin the paramedic program to serve all of the people of Portage County, not just the people who live in the city of Stevens Point. And it was a true partnership, a true opportunity for the city and the county to work together on what I have said on many occasions here, Chris, of all the multiple tiers of services that government provides. I can't think of anything more critical, more important to the people we serve than a service that saves lives and reduces pain and suffering. So congratulations to you and your team, and you are welcome here at any time to discuss any issue as we continue to strengthen this partnership as we have renewed it again for 4 more years. So thank you for that. If there are no other questions or thoughts, although I would have many on the EMS Oversight Board that I will share with you privately, but
Fair enough.
what I would like to do is move to item 7 at the request of Chief Finn. Item 7 on our agenda, Commissioners, is an update on the dissolution of the Communications Center Board. Chief Finn, you want to take the lead on that?
As you're all aware that when the city and the county combined, they created this communication board. It had no legal authority. It said right in there that the final word was the sheriff because the communication board falls under the sheriff. It was a committee that if you had ideas, it would just go and die, and it would be the same reports heard at different committee meetings. We talked about our Phoenix G2 paging system is the fire department for months tried to get a new paging system, and we went through the process of the communication board's policies. And after 6 months of this and that, they finally said, this isn't our decision, it's the county executive's decision. I think he was a little surprised by that answer too, and it was like, okay, then what are we doing here? So at the last communication board meeting, it was decided that instead of putting stuff before a board that has no legal authority and stuff was just dying, that when we have ideas or issues, we can go right through the chief deputy or the captain of the Portage County Sheriff's Department. If we can't get it resolved there, we can go through the sheriff. If we can't get it resolved there, we go through the county exec. It's more streamlined. It's again, I don't know why I'll keep my personal opinion why I think the committee was formed, but I think this is the right thing to do, and we'll see how it goes. Again, this goes back to the new way of doing things, that starting to build that trust between the city and the county again, and trying to work along. I don't know if the police chief has anything to say about it, or the county executive, but that was the update why it was dissolved at the last communication meeting.
Chris, anything you want to add, sir?
Sure, I can just chime in a little in the sense that I think it's a rough parallel to EMS oversight in the sense that it's there to provide a way for the constituent members of a given system, let's call it, to be heard, to have a voice, and to kind of move that through the system so that decisions that are made are contextualized appropriately. So what I said at that meeting was not to say that if the COM board were to go away completely, the same idea I mentioned earlier still holds, in a sense that maybe it's just a matter of, is there a better way to do it? Is there a better way to streamline things, or to make sure that the communication is going where it should, when it should, so that you don't add kind of a needless weight to an already bureaucratic system, which has pros and cons to it. But I think that the general sense of the committee was that there's still a good purpose to it. So I think that's why we saw the decision not to dissolve, but to say, have more quarterly meetings and kind of just change slight tweaks here and there, and then reassess as we move forward. So everybody, I think, is more or less on the same page. It's also, I think, part of, as time goes by, and again, these bureaucratic processes are set up, sometimes there's just, things that lie in the shadows that don't necessarily get light shown on them as often as they need. And so these sorts of conversations are shining that light, and hopefully it'll give people a better path forward, and we'll see how it goes. But it was somewhat of a surprise to me to hear it was my decision from, at least as it was communicated, because my understanding was that it was something that the sheriff, in his office has a heavy hand in turn of final decision on. So nothing to say that the sheriff and I don't talk quite a bit about all things under the sun, but at the end of the day, you also want to be very clear about that, so that if people have an issue, they're talking to the right people and knowing who makes that final call.
Chief Skiba, the police, of course, are a very heavy user of the comm center. Any thoughts before we move forward? I'll come back to you, Bob.
I will say that I think this will streamline some things, I believe, and again, instead of waiting for the meeting to be scheduled, rather recognizing that the need should be driving the communication, not just simply a scheduled meeting. So looking forward to, again, maybe making things a little bit more efficient, getting some of the bureaucratic clutter out of the way.
Bob?
We are still going to meet, but it's going to be more on an informal basis. It's not going to be, I believe there was a published meeting, I'm not sure. That's no longer going to happen. So everybody that had a seat at the table can still express their concerns, but I just think it streams, like what Chief Skiba said. It streamlines it, and it gets a lot of that bureaucratic red tape out of the way.
And just to build on that, I think that's an appropriate sort of way to look at it, in a sense that, especially in that world, or all of those worlds that interact with the COM board, you have those immediate tactical sort of needs versus a strategic decision about something like a RMS system. So I think splitting, if you will, some of the ways the committee approaches that things will hopefully get people what they need sooner.
Well, the commission encourages all of you to continue talking. It's a wonderful, very refreshing thing to hear. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for your time today, sir.
Thank you as well.
All right, let's move to item number 4, which is the approval of the minutes. Members of the Police and Fire Commission, we have minutes from our regular meeting on Tuesday, July 2nd, and the special meeting where we worked with the folks on the EMS contract from Monday, July 29th. I'll entertain one motion to approve both if there are no editorial corrections or modifications required.
I have no editorial correction.
I'll make a motion to approve both minutes.
All right.
I'll second it.
Commissioner Kirschling and Carlson. Comments or questions? All in favor of approving the minutes as they are presented to the commission, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 5 would be the confirmation of the bills. Although Commissioner Ostrowski is not able to be with us today, members of the commission, you'll notice that Bob has reviewed all of the bills from the police and the fire department. He has reviewed and signed off on them, so if you have any questions for either one of our chiefs, now is the time to ask. Chief Skiba, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
Commission President, I just want to bring to the Commission's attention, earlier we had discovered that as Commissioner Ostrowski was reviewing the PD expenditures and was reviewing our petty cash portion, which now with credit card has minimized, but there still is a need for that. recognizing that there was an oversight of the specificity that he was seeing just what things were being purchased. So with that in mind, I had a meeting with Commissioner Ostrowski, who will actually be when those come due, and it's not monthly, but when they come due, he will review the details of it to ensure that there's proper oversight. So whether it is the comptroller treasurer or his deputy, that they are reassured that this commission is approving of all the expenditures coming out of the police department, and I think will help facilitate, again, the appropriate expenditures that our department makes. But this way, again, everyone will be fully aware of it, so that's the only slight change that's going to be.
Thank you for reminding me. I wanted to remind the commission that we were adding that level of additional oversight upon review. We're taking a look at all the bills and budgetary items, but there was a different layer, a very tiny layer, that really needed review, I think, from a commission. And once, as Chief Skibba points out here, once that has been reviewed as part of the monthly process, we sign off, and there's a different comfort level at the comptroller's office. So thank you for reminding me of that. You're welcome. I will move approval. Go ahead, Commissioner Carlson. Go ahead, sir.
Chief Skibba, Lexipol came after I left, and could you just, I see it's $8,000 some dollars. Could you just explain what that is for people and what the officers do with that?
Yes, so briefly, a short history would be many years ago, I believe it was under Chief Carpenter, the police department had been accredited. That took many staff hours of the captain level and records administrator, and we determined that as staffing needs grew, we were able to come to Lexipol, a third-party vendor, lawyers that provide this service nationwide, but specifically also to Wisconsin. And so there are two portions of Lexipol. I believe, again, you pointed out the bill is approximately $8,000 a year. So for 50% of that, they review case law and keep our policies and best practices up to speed. As an example, the Sheriff's Office also utilizes it. The additional half of the cost, though, is what's a daily training bulletin where every day of the year, an officer, so for 365, they have to log on, and they are effectively taking a test after reading policy. How does this apply? And so we keep that policy in front of the officers. One of the benefits also is that if we have something new in case law, or if we've just recently encountered, let's say, an act of an assailant incident, we can come back to the officers, bring up those policies more related, and have the next month's worth to, again, just bring them back up to speed, refresh their minds about, okay, this is how we should be handling it, and more of an educational way of doing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions on the bills that have been submitted to the commission? Chief Finn?
President Westcott, when Commissioner Ostrowski was approving the bills in Leanne's office, I happened to be in there, and he did ask me about a bill from Point Trophy for $1,500. This was a project that took approximately 2.5 years to complete. It is, it's 3 boards, and 2 of them have guys' names on it, and 1 is blank for future, but it goes all the way back to the first firefighter ever in Stevens Point. It goes back into the 1800s. Chief Began started it before he left. Chief Moody really picked up the ball and ran with it. I mean, they went to libraries, they talked to the fire department historians, but every member of the Stevens Point Fire Department since its inception in 1892 or whatever, his name is on there, and it's posted, it's in the front hallway, and I would encourage everyone to come by to see it. And it's in the front hallway for a reason, so when the guys walk by that during the day, that's the history. Before these guys, they're there because of what these guys did to get there. And it's just a little commemorative thing that brings the history to the fire department. And I thought Chief Moody and Chief Gemmons should be commended on the work they did. Retired Captain Kutuski also was a big help with it. And also Point Trophy gave us, because of what reasons for a huge discount. And I think they should be commended because they knew what it meant to the community. So, and that's how I explained it to him. He's not here, so I just thought I'd say something about it.
Well, it's a wonderful
Yeah,
project.
yeah.
I'm very interested in knowing how many hours of research required to assemble that type of.
Chief Moody wants
Chief
to
Moody,
the
why don't you come
microphone
up to the
because that way
microphone?
you're on, I learned one thing, you
Chief?
gotta be at the podium so you're on camera and you can be heard.
Yeah.
I mean, I think at some point, and I know that in the month of October, we're going to have a presentation from the fire marshal on fire prevention and all that. I guess that means September Chief Skiba's month, but Assistant Chief Moody, tell us a little bit about this fascinating project and the type of time you and others poured into this. It had to be incredibly time-consuming.
So like Chief Finn had stated before, Chief Pagans and Chief Finn had started this project, and after his Chief Pagans' retirement, I kind of picked it up and kept going with it. Retired Lieutenant Brian Lazinski of the fire department assisted me, and we actually handcrafted the boards. Then we went back and put all the detail into the boards. Then Point Trophy was able to, after we had the boards established, set them up, just like the chief was explaining. On each nameplate, we have the title that the individual retired at, their name, and then the start year, and then the retirement year of that individual. Going back to the 1800s, I was unable to find some of the titles at which some of these members retired at. Even going back through film and microfiche, I was unable to find some of their titles. But we were able to get their names and their start year and some of their completion years. Moving forward into more current years, the members of the department that are still current with the department, their names and their start year are on their plaques or on their name tags. And when they retire from the department, their title and their end year will go on the plate as well. We can then take it off and update those things. The member has to complete 1 year of probation before their name is allowed to go on the board. So if they don't make their probationary period, their name is not on the board. And going through it, Chief was correct. We were able to go back to 1892 up through the current year. And like he said, it is on display at Station 1 in the main entryway. And also to go with that, a little bit of history and a little pride within the fire department. Lieutenant Kadrowski, Victor Kadrowski, and I are also working on crew boards that'll be on display also at the station in one of the other hallways, bringing back some of our current members, showing who's on each crew, kind of like the PD has here out in their front entryway, and bringing a little bit more pride back to the department and some ownership. So it's been a great project. It's been a long road, a lot of research, but and reaching out to a lot of retirees that were still able to help me. There was a lot of time involved. I've got some, with doing that, I also got a lot of good photos. Back to the days of, we had one individual, if anybody knows their history, back into when we had the West Side Fire Bridge, or the West Side Bridge burned down. York was the member of the fire department who actually took a team of horses with an engine across, fought the fire from the other side, and when they realized they were losing the fire, he put his members in the boat to come back across the point, and he drove the steam engine with the horses across the burning bridge. And when they come out the other side, members stated he had his head down and just appeared out of a black smoke cloud. And we have some of the pictures of them the next day bringing the hay down to the horses from above in the hay loft. And I was able to get my hands on a lot of other things that is going to be on display at the department very soon.
How many names are on that board? I was just curious.
To be honest with you,
Ballpark.
Ballpark, I would say right now there's probably about 200,
Okay.
150 to 200 names on it.
Did you get any help from the Historical Society, Tim Siebert, or any of those people?
No, because we were actually able, our membership has kept pretty good records in the past. And so we were able to use what we had, reaching out to some of, like I said, some of the retirees who were, from the 50s and 60s who were still able to communicate with me effectively, could remember further back, as being a rookie. Or we've used Katowski, Dennis Katowski, and Mark, who's currently a member, a third-generation firefighter, Carl Katowski, who was a member back in the early 1900s and actually was the chief for a period of time.
That's right.
So we were able to get a lot of information from them as well.
That's neat, very neat.
Very cool project.
So
When did we become a full-time fire department? Do you remember? Is it part of the board?
it is not part of the board.
We didn't start as a full-time department.
I am not sure.
Right, I don't know.
When we became a full-time department. We do have a historical signing when we became part of the local in our classroom on the wall, and that was in the 1930s.
Okay.
So, but I'm not sure when we became an actual full-time department. I'd have to look back.
Well, you and Chief Finn, the rest are absolutely to be commended. What a phenomenal project, and I couldn't agree with you more. What a tremendous way to show recruits and young firefighters of the proud heritage and tradition they are becoming a part of. Wonderful. I've already really come up with a great idea for a presentation in the near future with pictures and presentation. I'll be discussing with both of you.
All right, sounds good, thank you.
You're welcome. Wonderful. Where are we? Did we approve any bills yet?
No.
Do we have a motion?
You started.
I thought I did.
Yeah.
Well, let me finish. I'll move approval of the bills as submitted to us for the police and the fire services.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you, folks. Item number 6, update. As we begin the budget process again in the city of Stevens Point, we start today with the capital budget requests for the city of Stevens Point in 2020. Let's start first with the fire request. Chief Finn, you have the floor. Chief Gemza, you have the floor.
No, if I speak out of turn or say something wrong, you guys correct me, please. Under capital, under Department of Public Works or fleet, there was $1 million for a new ladder truck to replace ladder 3.
Right.
It's been discussed amongst the management team that was, and along with Dennis Layla, who's in charge of fleet, to push that back 2 years and reduce that amount to $650,000 to get an engine. And then we would have 2 engines and 2 trucks. And then the brush truck, which has been pushed back for approximately the last 4 years, is still in the rotation to get replaced this year. And that's as far as vehicles go. As far as capital expenditures, as I said to the comptroller treasurer, and we have 5 things that are reoccurring on capital. So when you go to have to rank these in orders of 1 through 10, it becomes difficult when the top 5 are basically part of your operating budget.
Right.
Turnout gear, general fire equipment, fire hose, technical rescue, and lapel mics. That's equipment that we have to replace by standards, by codes, and just to upkeep, make sure our guys have the right equipment to do their jobs every year. And then, so if you get rid of that, there's 5 more things. One of them is an update IT at Station 1 and 2 for $80,000. We had somebody coming yesterday to look at both firehouses to bring Station 1 and Station 2 up to, as Chief Gemza says, the year 2000. Wow.
Repeat that. Did you say to bring it up to the year 2000?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That's what I thought you said. Okay. What do we have to do to get us up to 2019 or 2020?
Well, part of this is getting us, within that is updating our training room, okay?
All right.
So we put it all together, but my belief is that because the infrastructure of the city IT is so bad, that should not be in my capital, I'm sorry. Just because it's my building and it's been neglected is not my fault. Same, I believe, should be with the police department. This is a city issue. The city has put back IT issues for years. We have something in the firehouse, for the internet. We have a phone line for it, it's plugged in, we don't know where it's at. We had IT, we had everybody out there looking for it, we don't know where it's at. We found out yesterday we have a secure password for the firehouse, we never knew we had, and now it's not on any of our devices. Commissioner Carlson, that's the same looks that we have.
Yeah.
So this is to update all the wiring to make sure that we can operate. And I'll talk about it in the storm, when we get to the storm updates a little bit, bringing more wiring and stuff so we can operate our own operations center during a major event. So that's where we're at with that. I have no idea what the cost, I just estimated that as $50,000 and then $30,000 update our training room. FD training site. We've been requesting a training site long before I was chief, maybe when I was an assistant chief. But through cooperations of Public Works and Utilities, the old garbage dump, they call it the pit on Whiting. Public Works has agreed to work with us and give us some land out there, clear it. They're gonna put the stuff they clean up from the street sweepers, they can use that to put down as a base and for a parking lot. They happen to be doing Whiting Avenue. We can get a hydrant in there, we can get electrical drop in there. And we've had discussions with them if we wanted to put permanent burn cells out there, which might be a possibility in the future with like Midstate or something, that we have more room. That includes a fence to keep it secure. We're not asking for a lot, but we need a place for training. And the reason I say this is if we get the training site, with the position of fire marshal getting inspections done, we're gonna be able to do more training. If we get the SAFER grant, there's been no announcement whatsoever on that yet, between the three guys, the fire marshal and the training site, we can become an ISO 1 within the next 2 years. And we'd be in the top 5% of fire departments in the country. Be the top 5 in the state of Wisconsin. No, I think we would be the 5th number 1, and that's what we're achieving to get to. Chief Skiba talked about, because Commissioner Carlton, this Lexipol policy writer, it's $12,500. Chief Moody did some research on it a while ago and came back and said, it's too much money. And then when he capital, he says, I've talked to the police department, I've talked to the sheriff, this is something that we need. After I had conversations with Chief Skiba, and it'd be the same thing with us. Our new policies, there'd be training, and it's something, it's not cheap, but it's something that's needed. And then with the fire marshal position, he's trying to make it his position, his office, and it'd be $6,000 for new software. And a carryover from 2018 was we need a new compressor and reels at Station 1, which is about $13,000. The bathrooms at Station 1 for $100,000, we pushed back to 2021. A new item for 2021 was a paging system. We put approximately $50,000 with this G2 system going in, and hopefully this should be installed by the end of the year. Like I said, Chief Guns have been in charge of that project, has worked closely with the county executive, IT, and Ed Eccleston. We're making progress there. But with the county's going out and getting information for, I believe, 2020, an RFP for a new CAD system, 2021 implementation. So it'd be approximately $50,000 to integrate the new CAD system with that paging system. So when the page goes off, all the information will come right up on the screen in the firehouse, address, all the CAD notes and stuff like that. So that's where we're at with capital expenditures.
Chief, I just have one quick question, and maybe some more after we're finished the presentation. When we have the request for Station 1 bathroom at $100,000, didn't we just within the last few years do a major renovation at fire headquarters?
The whole upstairs was done,
Right.
okay? Downstairs, the men's and women's bathroom are both the original bathrooms.
Okay, all right. That's where I thought you were
They're
going.
functional.
Yeah,
Okay.
all right,
This stuff takes a little bit priority over that.
okay. All right, are there any questions for Chief Finn? Then we'll move to the police chief. Chief Skibba?
So you actually were handed out a second copy. The reason the second copy came out, just a little bit of history, which would actually have the red lines underneath with some asterisks. And the reason I bring this to you is in the past, and I'm sure from a records keeping perspective, just to kind of focus on what appeared to be in need within the next kind of 5-year cycle, there were many items that, quite frankly, go longer, like firearms, 10 years and so on, and so those were left off. And unfortunately, then if you're just looking at this year, 5 years out, it might be the 6th year this year, but next year all of a sudden it comes in, but it wasn't put there as a reminder. So I brought these in and then spoke with the comptroller treasurer, and it seems like their office is willing to extend these out a little bit more, just so there's an easier tracking, and really we get that our budgets, our capitals clearly are much bigger than a 5-year, 6-year program.
You're creating a longer-term record.
Correct,
Okay.
and a better, quite frankly, budgeting perspective. Again, as a new chief coming in, all of a sudden you don't see a few lines, and then you realize kind of now it's short notice, it's no longer 10 years, and you're kind of scrambling to justify why now all of a sudden you need $500,000.
Sure, you're dealing with a broader baseline there. That's a
So-
good idea. It's a real good idea.
So that was more of just so you have a visual on that, but if you go back to the original one that was handed out then, that has no red lines in them. You will see on the first page that under fleet, there's a request for $5,000, $7,000. That's actually for seats. The city has determined our patrol fleet will be now on a 3-year cycle, not a 2-year cycle. The problem with that is 24/7 service, those seats break down, and now you have officers riding things that they just should not have to. And so trying to plan that operationally, when it's 1 year out of every 3, we're seeking just $7,000 to replace the fleet seats. And that's why that's there.
Chief, excuse me, what year are we currently in with the fleet?
So next year is going to, this would be our full first year, so next year would be our second year, and that's why the purchasing them, again, not just for the last year and having them so broken down. So we'd make the purchase and they'd go in approximately August, September of next year, so we'd get a good amount of use off the next. And then many a times the city takes our fleet, puts them back into service of whether it's inspection or something like that. So quite frankly, there's a lot of vehicles right now that other city employees are driving around with just terrible seats. But that's for their department heads to fight. So this will help them out in the long run.
Are we worried about mileage here? I would think after 3 years of vehicles constantly patrolling, I don't know.
There is additional operational dollars that
Right.
the third year eats up. Obviously, the first under warranty,
Right.
you see very little, but we don't get to take those operating dollars and toss them to the third year. Those go away, and then we scramble for the third year. This has been explained, but when you're looking at approximately a $300,000 capital expenditure, if you can push that off a year, and it costs you $7,000 in capital or $10,000, $20,000 operationally, I suppose from the dollars it makes sense. The downtime, however, becomes problematic, the inconvenience to the employees. But again, this was an administrative decision outside of my scope.
I think the calculus in 21 would be pretty interesting to look at. Downtime, those vehicles are now well into their third year, the amount of time they're in the garage, that we'll create some type of a spreadsheet to track that, and that'll be well worth watching. Please continue, sir.
Minimally, I would say as long as operationally, the city administration recognize that operationally in the third year, there needs to be additional monies put towards it, not just made up in other operational accounts. I would agree with you.
Okay, thank you.
But I understand the capital versus operational. Moving to the second page, you will see under police, so firearms, recognizing that we do need to address that coming up. So in 2021, we are looking for a request of replacing our pistols. Obviously, those have huge liability concerns anytime you're talking about equipment such as that, and that would be approximately 10 years of use out of our current pistols. So that would be for 2021. We then come down to the building, looking at the evidence and processing, the garage and the patrol offices. We are seeking all of those, obviously, again, high liability equipment of the city. When you have that, the need to be able to have an emergency response. Today's technology, where if a squad is shut down and it sits there overnight, and the officer gets in it in mid-January, mid-February, and now needs 10 minutes for that system to warm up and communicate when, again, as the chief was talking about CAD and things like that, not getting that information to the officer on an emergency, it's problematic, and they should be under these facilities. So the idea would be the garage would go in, we would finally have a proper evidence and processing area, and then proper offices. Again, the council was very supportive of us moving into this school and securing it, with the city, with the building being unoccupied for several years. Much of those monies got spent in just, again, patching stuff that was leaking, rusted out, and so we're seeking to finish that up. We then go to the building. We are scheduled to re-roof half the building this year, and we have the additional half, this northern half, that we are seeking at $110,000, I believe. Sorry, excuse me, $125,000 to re-roof. This north half, the reason is prioritized as 7 is because compared to the other needs, as I've been advised, this portion of the roof being glued down in its form and fashion, we can manage patching it for a few more years compared to the necessity of the other capital requests, and that's why it's listed as low as it is, as number 7. Operationally, I believe we can still manage that. We then move down the line and go to general equipment gas masks. Every officer previously had been issued a gas mask. Realizing in today's day and age that's not practical to maintain. However, clearly our tactical team, our SWAT team, is in need of that. So we are seeking $20,000 to replace that, again as a priority. The masks we have, though approximately 15 years of age, are not used frequently, so they're still serviceable. The cartridges, however, are more difficult to find.
Right.
We then move to tasers. Again, the less lethal from a liability perspective, the times that we can implement those type of pieces of equipment, we need to. They do have computers built into them, technology-wise, and we are coming to end of life with our earliest series of tasers and need to replace those. Those are carried by all of our patrol officers, as well as our investigators when they go out on investigations, warrants, things like that, and then our tactical team. So the reason the general equipment portable breath test equipment is highlighted along with office computer equipment is because there's nothing within the next 5 years budgeted for, and that was highlighted by the treasurer's office to make you aware of that.
All right.
Currently, we are doing well with our investigator equipment, our computer forensics, so that was pushed out. In 2021, we are looking at a little bit of the negotiator response system for $25,000 has been pushed further away. In today's technology, with cell phones and some software apps that we're implementing. We want to utilize those for a couple of years before we determine if we really need to kind of stay with a hard line that's sent into a home, and so that's why that's moved back. You will see the number 1 rated, and again, much like Chief Finn had alluded to, was direct about, you have some lines that you just absolutely need from an operational perspective. Under CGIS, we are required to have certain protocols in place, and so for 3 years, this year, almost 90,000, next year, 110, and the year after that, 40,000 to accomplish that. It's somewhat unfortunate that we actually have to list this as a necessity when, by statute, we have to have it done. But, so we are continuing on with that request. We then moved down to records management system, and this was one that is driven primarily as the sheriff's office maintains that system that we, Plover, and Portage County utilize. That system, TriTech, is not as user-friendly as some are and as robust, so they currently have some subcommittees looking into it. It's under my account, my budget, as opposed to the fire departments, even though they would be utilizing some of that via CAD. The fact is, we're the primary users, and that's why it's in here as a need. The last one is the repeater radios. Those were not replaced when simulcast was initiated back in 2014, when Portage County purchased the mobiles and portable radios for Plover, Stevens Point, and Stevens Point Fire. And so we are in need of replacing those. And then you will see under that, we broke down actually the various radios, and those going out to 2024, approximately $200,000 for those radios coming up in the future. Those would be the highlights of it. And again, primarily, the thing that I would ask the commission to be cognizant of is, and I understand why the council needs to do this, and it makes sense that they have an overall operating capital limit. But when you look at buildings, overpasses, bridges, any of those are always going to be well above and beyond the set capital. And so I would ask that the commission, when they can, support the fact that this is a known need and that it should be budgeted for sooner than later. Again, when we made the request, it had been put out to 2023. I think that's more than slightly problematic, and it needs to get built for the garage to actually provide us proper access to Michigan Avenue and address the protection of that high liability fleet.
All right, are there questions for Chief Skiba? It is my understanding, both chiefs, these capital budgets have already been submitted to the Comptroller Treasurer's Office. Is that correct, gentlemen? These capital budgets have already been submitted. Is that correct?
Correct.
Has there been any initial feedback or questions for either fire or police at this point?
I believe we were advised within the next week or two, the treasurer and the mayor were going to be sitting down with the department heads to include us to go through their initial questions, concerns, and recommendations, as I understand it.
Okay, Bob?
That was mine also, but just FYI, operating budgets are probably be coming up by the end of this week, beginning part of next week.
Yeah, read my mind. I was going to ask you about that. All right. Since these have already been reporting out to the Comptroller's Office, I think a simple motion that the commission has reviewed them at this point in time and have endorsed them for this moment in time with recommendations for very serious consideration and approval to the items as listed by our police chief and fire chief. That would be my motion if you...
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Both say no. Okay, we'll send that on to the mayor and the comptroller. And again, operational budget directions are coming out later this week?
Correct.
All right, so we'd like to know what that is when they are available. All right, thank you. Thank you both for well-documented and lots of budgets for us to study. All right, let's move to item number 8, the storm report update from Chief Finn and Chief Skibba, members of the commission. After almost any significant action in the community, it is the policy of this commission to do and conduct what is by statute called an after-action report. So we have asked for an after-action report for the police, fire, and EMS responses during the severe weather that, well, I think we're all very familiar with, and many of us led quite a Spartan life for several days. Chief Finn, by virtue of rank, you would go first, sir, reporting to the commission on, or Chief Skibba, you tag team it, you guys do it together.
I'll go what I got.
Yeah, good point.
In the 48 hours of Saturday and Sunday, Stevens Point Fire Department responded to a total of 55 runs. On Saturday, there was, during the storm, there was 15 calls for assistance. Engine 1 assisted a hypertensive patient, 6 calls for down wires, transformers, 1 water rescue for people that were stuck in the Michigan Avenue underpass, and there was some medical issues where they needed assistance getting out of the car. 2 possible gas leaks, 1 smell of smoke, 1 alarm sounding, a Metro call for smoke in the basement, sump pump motor seized up, UWSP LRC generator issues, their generator went out at 5:30 on Sunday morning, and smoke spilling out of the library. They were like, oh, right. And a false call. And there was also 14 EMS runs during that day. On Sunday, there was a mutual aid fire to Dewey and Dubay Road. Also a Metro fire to Plover. It wound up being a cooking fire in an apartment building. 3 ambulance assist with fire apparatus, 1 ambulance assist for 2 vehicle, motor vehicle accident, and then also 20 ambulance calls during that time. We did call people back in. We had 6 people came back in on Saturday, and then we probably had 4 people come in on Sunday for standby for the fire. Also during that time, the generator station 1 on Saturday night at approximately 6 o'clock went out. Station 1 had no power. We had the mechanic from City Garage. We had WPS out there and Cummings. Cummings Power happened to be in the area, and they came in and they got the generator running. We were down with power for about 2 hours, but we couldn't be without power. They were telling us Tuesday or Wednesday before we got power back. We finally got power back at Station 1 on Sunday about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. What I would like to say is that during this event, there's been some things said that how the city responded. Well, I can tell you firsthand, because myself, Chief Moody were there, that the men and women of the Stevens Point Police Department, the men of the Stevens Point Fire Department, and the members of the Utility and Water Department should be commended for the job they did in this city. For all extensive purposes, the event for the city, for emergency personnel, other than the power outages and the traffic problems it was creating for the police department, was over with by 2:30. Each department met, communicated with each other. We had a plan, and we enacted the plan. We provided the citizens of Stevens Point, I think, great service that day. And anybody that doesn't think so, I take offense to that, because I saw the efforts that were put out by everybody I just mentioned. Other than the power being out for so long, we had no control over that. And I just wanted to go on record saying that the people that work for the city, they stepped up and they went out above and beyond to get the job done for the citizens. And Portage County opened up their EOC about 2:30 in the afternoon. Myself, Director Lemke, Director Kramer, from the new guy from the Parks, we went over there thinking that they might have new information. They were just open, and they had no other information. They asked what was going on in the city, and we told them, for all extensive purposes other than cleanup, we're done. We can get through every street, emergency vehicles can get through. The police department, I'll let Chief Skiba, granted, there was a nightmare. Okay, do you want me to talk about the stop signs, or you're gonna talk about?
I'll take care of that.
Okay. All right, I'll shut up now.
Chief Skiba?
So, much as Chief Finn had said, kind of the opening of the streets, cleaning them up. Lieutenant Bean was working that day, working directly with streets, with the fire department, able to communicate and say, this is where the issues were, and getting those addressed in what I would say a very timely manner. From that, however, we did call 2 officers in for staffing to address some of the issues and the ongoing, whether again it was because power outages and responding to alarms, traffic concerns and monitoring. What I can tell you is from long ago, signage where side streets, so take 4th Avenue as an example. So when power goes out at that intersection, Division and 4th, it then by signs are treated much like if it was Franklin Street at Division. But a controlled intersection with no power is actually statutorily a 4-way stop. Our signage is not appropriate. After action review of that, working with streets, they're currently looking to secure and appropriately fasten stop signs that are going to be able to be dropped. Again, having an event like this where the bulk of our primary control signals are not functioning for a long period of time, I think most of the people driving were considerate, but there were multiple times where people were surprised, and we had a lot of near misses officers were reporting. And so recognizing that, and again, street stepped up and again working to take care of that for us for future control. Similarly, again, we live in a very low-lying area next to a river. Our underpasses, not only for this event, but several times a year, flood. That creates issues. It takes manpower, again, whether it's the fire department getting there to man it while we're doing other things or what have you. So we are working with streets and the railroad to determine, are there ways that we can better secure those areas to ensure that we don't have, again, another incident where now we have to take care of someone who gets stuck in there and caught in that environment. Along with that, we also recognize that the city is responsible for buildings such as Edgewater Manor. Again, as power goes out, and I think Commissioner Carlson can recall a time when we actually had SWAT officers at training who came to assist evacuating Brick Street High Rise when power was out, heat issues, and so as I relate it to Edgewater Manor, unfortunately the generator failed there. And it wasn't until well after the event that we were made aware of it. Now, fortunately, there was no medical need, but we shouldn't be relying on luck to serve our community. So we have since worked with the powers that be to ensure that there is a proper notification process to, again, keep us in the loop. And again, erasers on pencils, we're never going to get everything perfect, but if we can learn and adjust and make things better from these incidents, so the next time we respond, we can respond better. And I think, again, I echo the chief's sentiment that the employees for the city that were working through this did a great job. Being that we do more press releases from the police department, I can understand we also need to communicate that with our community. I believe it was Lieutenant Bean who put something on our Facebook page, but again, this is something larger than that, and I think we get sometimes caught up in just thinking social media provides and is a proper resource when clearly we have a multitude of ways of communicating it, and that is something that we ourselves are working with our lieutenants, who are our primary responders here on off hours, to again communicate and make sure and reassure our community. But that would be it from the PD side.
At any time during the storm, did either of you feel that you had insufficient staff available, or did you always feel that adequate resources were available in spite of the tremendous demand at times? Chief Ben?
We put a call out for off-duty personnel, for all personnel. Like I said before, we had 6. What I failed to mention in my report is that during the height of this, we had taken over and we had our own operations center because of the underpasses being flooded, that we called comm center and told them all calls that were not saying my house is on fire, just forward to 1833. We had a whiteboard up, and that's why we talked about updating our training room so we can have the capabilities of doing this, and because DOC is not a place for that. That is operations.
Right.
But we had sufficient people on the south side of town and the north side of town because we knew of the challenges of getting through. I believe the Michigan underpass was open by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Church Street was a few days. Like any, but to answer your question, yes, I think we had sufficient manpower. With the, and Chief Skibben, when he was talking about it, with emergencies, if the power remained out as long as it did, and the heat and humidity stayed as high as it was, we would have had certain issues. Some of them issues were discussed during that day. We have pre-plans in the firehouse on how to operate with this, like if we had to evacuate Edgewater Manor. We know how to contact city buses, get air conditioning buses and stuff like that in place and start moving people. St. Mike's was going in and out of power. There were certain patients that couldn't go there. We had to take them to Aspirus. That was all communicated. Captain Zavar was basically running the operations inside the firehouse. So, yeah, I think we had sufficient people. Yeah, I can't speak for the police department because other than have a policeman in every corner.
Well, I'm sure Chief Skibben would endorse that plan. But Chief Skibben, your thoughts, sir?
And again, in some respects, the immediate emergency was somewhat short-lived in the initial larger traffic control issues, wires down, as far as getting barricades up or notice and making people aware of that. So there are moments, and again, you'll never have enough, and you make do with it, but after that short burst of critical response, we did have proper staffing to address any concerns that were coming up, once recognizing just the totality of the size and scope of the event. And so I think we were able to respond. And again, with having at the ground level communications with streets, with the fire department, knowing, okay, what is your plan? This is how we're going to address it. This is the best way we can utilize the resources. And that's probably more than anything compared to having the staffing, but what is the direction we're going to take and then move forward with it.
Are there comments or questions from the commission for either one of our chiefs?
I just want to say, I think, the police, fire, streets, everybody pulled together and worked through it, and it's a learning experience every time. But what I also want to commend, too, is the citizens and the neighbors in the community, because that's what I saw. I saw people helping people that sometimes don't even talk to each other, but everybody's out there in the yard, whether it's cutting up a tree, moving it off the street, doing whatever. That's what I saw, people coming together in the community, and you folks doing your job, and everybody gets through a situation like that. And that's what it takes. It takes everybody working together to make it work. So good job to everybody.
Commissioner Moore?
I think all the men and women of the city did a great job. The thing that I felt was lacking was I turned on the city radio station to see if there was any updates or information on there, and there was nothing. The problem with Facebook is I can go on there and Facebook will have a post, or maybe I'll completely miss a post, and 4 hours later, I'll find something that was posted 10 hours ago. So it's not reliable as far as a communication device for an emergency situation. I'm not talking about the power being out. We all knew the power was out. Who cares? I'm talking about road closures. Those kinds of things are more important as far as keeping people away from where things need to be repaired, trees that need to be cleaned up, divert the traffic away. Those kinds of things are the information that I think people were looking for that they were not getting, ways to get around through the community in a safe manner that was safe for the people working out there and safe for everybody else. When we approved the radio station, I pretty much believe that that was one of the selling points on it, was that it was going to be used for emergency situations. And I'm a little disappointed that trying to get that information, and I understand it's old school technology, it's not the newest, greatest thing in the world, but I think everybody could scrounge around their house and find a battery operated radio and get
Right.
information
Yep.
off of it.
Right, good point.
And that was lacking. That was a very good comment.
Right. But for the sake of clarification, that would not be under the jurisdiction of our police or fire
I agree.
services
It's
to
nothing to
implement a
do with-
radio.
Yep.
All right, well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, please.
Of course you can.
After any event, you always do your after-action review and what you can and can't do better. The police department's more used to putting out press releases than I am, okay? But, let's be honest. And should a press release gone out? Yes, probably, okay? But I'm gonna be honest with you, it was done in such a short period of time that by 2 o'clock, I mean, this thing started at 10:30 in the morning, or, 10:30. By the time you put the streets up there, they would have been clear. If this was a prolonged thing, I think it would have been more beneficial. Could we, the city, have gotten more information out to the citizens? Yes, okay? But, and it could be short-sightedness on me, because, I mean, I was there, but once I thought all the emergencies were over with, that we can get through the streets and stuff like that, in my mind, the short-sightedness is thinking the event is over, and it's not. The cleanup's got to begin. And people, we could not get answers from WPS. They're telling us for the firehouse Wednesday.
That's not, my point is the fact that you said it yourself. The underpass on Division Street, the most major used street in this community, was closed for days. Not just one day, not for 4 hours. And there was no communication from the city whatsoever about that, at all. That could have been handled much better.
I think it's also important to point out that when I have met with both the police chief and the fire chief in advance of this meeting to discuss after action, I too would add what Commissioner Carlson said, a level of commendation and professional pride this commission has for both of the services. If you want to get any idea of the extent of the chaos, and I will use the word chaos, is I had the opportunity to have communication with the communication center during the height of this on other matters, and they were absolutely swamped.
Good word.
Yeah, it was a good one.
Swamped.
And I think it was appropriate when Chief Finn took the proactive step to say, if it's not a fire, send it directly to 1833. We'll triage it here. I have also reviewed with Chief Skiba and Chief Finn, and yes, they do have all sorts of operational plans to cover this. But the key to this, again, as you have said, is how does the community react? We can't put a police officer on every corner. And it's how the community reacts, and sometimes it's just a matter of some common sense. If you're approaching an intersection and all the traffic signals are dark, slow down, stop and take a look. Don't just keep driving because you don't have a red light. So, with that being said, commendation to all involved, all who responded, all who answered the call, and all who helped continue to protect the city. And as an old broadcaster, Jerry, I certainly would echo the need to get a radio station active in this area. And actually, I had forgotten that, but I think you're right, Commissioner, that part of the point of applying for that license was it would be available for communication over battery-powered operated radio. So thank you for that. So with that being said, if there are no further comments, we will move to item 9. Members of the commission, you have in your packet a letter from Chief Finn concerning a vacation carryover for Assistant Chief J.B. Moody. Chief Finn.
Yes, I believe, it's in your packet that according to city administrative policy and vacations, you're only allowed to carry over 40 hours. With Assistant Chief Moody getting promoted, this year's vacation time was earned last year. That was earned in 24-hour shifts. So I'm requesting that he be allowed to carry over an additional 56 hours besides the 40, up to 96 hours, which should be used in the next 6 months after his anniversary date of August the 16th. Because if we didn't, he would have been offered from now until past his anniversary date and still carrying over. Operations of the fire department would cease. I believe I did this with Chief Davis and also Chief Begans, but that went before personnel. Then realizing that this body is the one that pertains to fire department and police department personnel that should be brought here. So I'm just asking for your approval. I have a letter, I signed them, I have 2 copies. I'm requesting that President Westcott sign them and approve and date them so I can put one in Chief Moody's file and give one to Sarah at payroll, allowing this vacation to be carried over.
And what I would add to that are the 2 critical points the chief has made already. There will be some continuity of continuing of operations. And this really doesn't carry any additional fiscal impact. I mean, Chief Moody is on salary for the year on the budget, so I think it's a prudent thing to do, and I will move approval of the request as submitted to the Police and Fire Commission from Chief Finn.
I'll second that.
Second by Commissioner Moore. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Okay. Item number 11 is Fire Chief and EMS report. Chief Finn, you have the floor, sir.
What about number 10?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Item number 10, the new reading glasses are on the way, I might have. Staffing discussion of Police Records Bureau. Chief Skibbo?
I wanted to bring this before the commission more as informational, knowing that, again, somewhat unique in that we do have a number of personnel that actually fall under the city's administrative policy and not under the Police and Fire Commission. But with that said, operationally, as we've spoke before about succession planning, about mentoring, recognizing again, time marches on, if you will. And what we found with the patrol side of things, we have had leads, we've had RSSs, reserve shift supervisors, training them to be able to be supportive of the current administration and then filling roles as needed. And to that point, as it comes to records, recognizing that, as an example, in Leanne's position with the numbers of weeks of vacation, things like that, when she goes on vacation, she should be able to not be concerned that her inbox is 3 and 4 and 5 times more full because no one else is trained to be able to step into that role and facilitate the things that need to be done. So what we are looking to do is draft policy and submit it to personnel requesting a lead position be created within our Records Bureau. We currently have 3 records personnel that work under Leanne, and recognizing that to train somebody up and have them in that role and adjusting their job description a bit. Much like on our sworn side, we seek a 2% increase within that wage. We would be looking to do that similarly within our records staff. That's approximately $1,500 within our operating budget. I believe I am able to support that. So there's no fiscal impact to the city as such. And so just to make you aware of the request, that's probably going to be moving forward to personnel in September.
I just want
Good idea.
Could I just comment for Chief Skibbo, when you talk, I just happened to see the daily roster of the day I started on the police department in 1978. And at that time, we had a sergeant in charge of Records Bureau, a captain in charge of Records Bureau, and 5 civilian employees in Records Bureau. And the work then was probably nowhere near the work level that you have now. And then talk about the camera stuff and everything else that's newly added to that. I think not only do you create a lead person, I'm thinking you need more help in Records Bureau.
I do not disagree with you. From a prioritization of things, I think this is one of those first steps.
Right.
Some of their current work is with parking, hoping to bring some of that administrative work under our current CSO program, but again, developing that a little bit more robustly and finding dollars within the city's current budget, looking to do that. But yes, I can't, there's no way I could explain the workload that our staff does and make sense of how efficient they are in doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Chief, I think conceptually the commission would endorse this, but as Chief Skibba mentioned, Leanne is a civilian employee and technically not under the personnel policy direction of this commission. Is it your intent to return in September with the actual formal proposal for us to adopt or endorse for the September Personnel Committee? What is your thinking, sir?
So I know I need to formally present it to personnel, but minimally I want to make the commission aware of it. I'm more than happy to bring the actual detailed document, if the commission wishes, to you, so you see what actually the dollars I effectively am taking from other lines, if you will, to fund this, and then what the job description looks like in that. I'm more than happy to bring that before the commission in September.
I think that's what I would prefer to do if I have a consensus. I'd like the record to reflect that as of this meeting, there is general consensus among the commission to strongly support the concept, and we will look forward to reviewing the formal plan and details at our September meeting, which would be in advance of the City Personnel Committee meeting, and it would be my intent to formally go on record endorsing the recommendation to basically create, additional leads or a chain of command in that department. And Commissioner Carlson, I thought your comments were really pointed there. Very, very good point. So that's where we stand on that. I don't think we need anything else for a motion, if my colleagues agree. And with that, we will now move to item 11, which is the Fire Chief's Report and EMS Chief in.
Just FYI, the next PFC meeting is September the 3rd.
Right.
I will not be able to attend. One of my more than capable assistant chiefs will be here. That is my daughter's wedding weekend, so I will not be attending that meeting. On the EMS report and fire report, the one thing that sticks out was at Riverfront, the 3-day celebration went off without any major EMS, but I believe it's the first time in history of Riverfront that we shut down Riverfront because of severe thunderstorm warnings. Again, we had a plan with the police, fire, EMS, and parks. If this happened, this would happen, severe thunderstorm warning. Today's technology, not myself, but people had radar on their phones. So when the severe thunderstorm warning came out for Portage County, we made communications with the comm center. They said no, it was what was coming. We shut down the music. We advised the people what was there. The one building that was brick, we allowed them people to stay and the music to continue, but also let them know what was coming. And we wound up shutting down the music for about 45 minutes. But that was to ensure the safety of all involved. Workers and citizens attended. Other than that, the reports pretty much speak for themselves. Any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Are there any questions on the Fire Chief's report, including the EMS report from Chief Gimson?
Nope.
I entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve it.
And I'll second it.
Commissioner Moore and Commissioner Carlson, all in favor of accepting the Fire Chief's report as submitted, please say aye.
Aye.
Both say no. Item 12, Chief Skibba, your report, please.
So first, I would like to recognize Detective Lepak for all of his work under notes of interest. Been doing a lot of work with some very large thefts through fraud that have been occurring. The most recent one, over $150,000 of property that had been fraudulently purchased. And again, it speaks a little bit to somewhat of the change in recognition of what we're doing with our staff. Previously, and I completely understand the prior administration's perspective of rotating our investigators every 3 years, the idea of providing additional training to other officers that might be interested, possibly moving this training to the road. But again, once you are on patrol, your workload is such that you don't have the time to investigate. And so with the support of this commission, we have allowed our detectives to stay in those roles longer. And this is a prime example where, because he had worked on prior cases and some of the ancillary individuals involved in those started popping up in this, he was able to come to a case where they will be seeking prosecution of this individual, and got some excellent work out of Iowa as well, and following that up. But again, wanting to publicly recognize all the hard work that Detective Lepak has done for this community. Moving down as far as some things that we're advancing under the drug crisis response under projects. Our current CIT officer, Officer Radzik, is working with Health and Human Services. We're going to be working with the university as well to come up with some ways that we can better respond to our victims in the drug crisis here. And what I mean by our victims are the family members who are dealing with an individual who is in the throes of addiction with drugs, the addict themselves, as well as children. We've been encountering too many children going to ER, showing up positive with meth, cocaine, heroin. And so much like back in 04, 05 when Chief Morris recognized mental health on the rise and started getting patrol officers into crisis and intervention training, seeking what we can do and partnering with other police departments as to what they're doing to better have their response. So just because our title is law enforcement, many of the things we do are more of a caretaker status, and this is again one of those roles that we're trying to develop. The last thing that I want to note, very much at the conceptual level, in having conversations with the school superintendent on safety and security of the schools this summer, discussion has come up about having a school resource officer available for the elementary level. Again, more in that caretaker level of things, and being able to respond and partner with the school district, partner with Health and Human Services, but again, at this time, from a funding perspective, not a clue. And when I have to kind of triage things, a drug officer, the level of staff we have at the patrol level, clearly this is something that we would have to see funding coming very strongly from the school district. Some agencies are actually now hiring part-time sworn personnel for their SRO position, because again, if you can fund maybe 1,200 hours as opposed to the 2,000 hours, it may be more affordable. So we are looking into that, just seeing what all our options are. But this is something that I would not foresee this commission seeing for several years, realistically, but knowing that it's there, we're working on it, and there is a need.
When you say a caretaker role for elementary, I'm not sure I understand what we mean by that.
So right now, if you have a elementary student who is out of control, combative,
Okay.
striking out at teachers, at students, we wind up sending a patrol officer who, though he's trained from a CIT perspective, you're taking somebody who's in the mindset of traffic enforcement, domestic abuse responses, OWI enforcement, drug impaired drivers. Oh, by the way, now deal with 8-year-old little Johnny, and the mindset. And if we can, much like our school resource officers, even at the junior high and high school, as it progresses up through grades, it does move again from that, how can we care for the student, get them into a safer, healthy environment in that crisis, to the enforcement aspect, and okay, here are your ordinance tickets for underage possession and things such as that at the high school level. And so recognizing that, as well as if we can have that officer contact at that elementary level where it's not just an officer securing them, getting them to a parent, and that's it, we also can potentially steer that person into a healthier environment and healthier relationship with law enforcement as they grow and mature into our community.
Is that a special tier of training then for elementary?
It's not a special tier, but I can tell you that the state is currently looking at a recommended best practices for what trainings they would recommend SROs having across the board to again ensure that whether you're a small agency or a larger agency, are you recognizing that they should, drug and, I apologize, the classes are escaping me, but drug endangered children, there are courses about that. There are courses for crisis-informed care. And so there are topics more related, again, to care of and caretaker status rather than law enforcement.
Okay. I understand, thank you. Are there questions for Chief Skibba?
I was just going to throw 2 cents in. When I was on the police department in a management, I always advocated for school liaisons in the grade schools, not only for those disruptive students or the people who have problems, but for the other children there to begin that bond with law enforcement at an early age rather than waiting to high school where you're just dealing with the problems. The bond is developed earlier. You could do so much as far as education in the grade schools and just the daily contact and rotating officers to specific schools. So I'm glad you're picking up that ball, and there's definitely a need at that. I spend a lot of time popping popcorn at Jefferson School, and I see the issues that go on almost every time I'm there. Somebody's having a problem, I would say. So there's a need, and it needs to be filled, so I'm glad you're doing that.
No, I'm good.
Chief, I just had one more follow-up in your report on staffing, the vacant drug officer position. Would you update us? You mentioned in your line item here, you're reviewing budget, seeking funding. Would that be yet for this year, or are you determining how you're going to handle that for next year's budget? I wasn't quite clear on what that was.
So again, with the idea that the council was supportive and had approved the position based on funding.
Right.
Obviously, we are being made aware the operational lines are just coming out now for our review.
Right.
The comptroller treasurer, I believe, had spoke last month advising that from the kind of September, October, he would know where staffing is sitting for 2020. With that said, some of that commentary in my report is to say that as soon as I hear that the 2020 position exists, I will be hiring somebody this fall with dollars that we have this year to get that drug officer going. We've waited woefully too long, and so the sooner I can start them this year, it takes us almost 4 months to get an officer from hire date to actually solo patrol. And to think that we should put it off almost another half a year when we get approval September, October, when the council is very supportive of this, if I can find the dollars, again, we held off a couple of months in hiring a vacancy at the beginning of the year with the intent to do some of this kind of pre-hire or triaging the situation. So looking to hire somebody late this fall, if at all possible. Clearly, we're not going to hire him late fall only to know that the treasurer's telling us there's no money in 2020. That would be quite tragic, quite frankly, but as soon as we get that green light, we need to be ready. And we have a couple of people on the list that would be great new hires for this department.
Good.
And so looking forward to it.
Good. I commend you being proactive on that. Are there other questions for Chief Skibba?
I just have one
Go
more.
ahead, sir.
The other thing that jumped off the page at me was the 24 mental health commitments this last month, which seems to be getting, go ahead, you want to jump in?
No, thank you for pointing that out. There was a notation, so some things that happen that kind of get by a person. I saw the number and asked, okay, this is not right. And it is and it isn't. And what I mean by that is, with the new crisis intervention officer, Officer Radzik, he is counting all of the commitments that are occurring. There are many that are voluntary comparatively, and he said we're still averaging that 6 to 8 on the emergency side. But I've asked him to separate them moving forward, but I think it's important that not only this commission, but council and the community be aware of how large of a need we have in mental health within our community and nationwide. And this is a better perspective. Let's not keep it in the shadows and be a stigma anymore. Let's recognize whether it's a heart condition, a brain condition. It's just, we're biological. It's part of who we are, and it needs to be recognized. But it still requires time. If an officer is dealing with somebody, they're manifesting symptoms, but they say, hey, I need help, the officer still is bringing them to the emergency room, still making phone calls, still explaining the situation to make sure and comforting that person until they get the care. And so it's still time on scene, time on the ground that we're involved, so.
Yep.
But thank you for bringing that up.
Are there any other questions? No. Liaison, any questions? No, okay. With that, I will move approval of the police chief's report as submitted to the commission.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Before we adjourn, Chief Finn, the best to you and your family on the marriage of your daughter.
Wait. I know it's going to be a great video.
That's all we've been hearing about for weeks now, right?
It's
All right,
going
with
to be
that.
a great video.
All right, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.